Welcome to another Pixel Game Maker tutorial. Today's other runtime action we're going to go over is the push-pull object runtime. And this runtime is providing a simple pull-in or push-out method for other objects that come in range with this object. And while it looks like there is a lot of settings going on here, there's mainly three parameters in this runtime. The first one here at the top is called effective range and range direction. And what these options and settings are giving you is to set up a range, an area around this object so that it knows when to push the other object. The next parameter is the effect setting. And what these options and settings are giving you is control of the other object that is coming into the range of this object. So what angle do they get pushed at? How far do they get pushed? Does it only happen once? These are some of the settings and options that you do for the other target. And then the last parameter, the set target object, in here is where you specify what targets can be pushed by coming into the range of this object. So it's really simple. You set the range, you set the effect of what happens if someone touches the range, and then you set what targets can actually be affected by this runtime. So let's start getting some examples in here, and something we always like to do is we like to start with the default settings just to get a good base of how these runtimes work. So under the effective range and range direction, we'll notice that the first setting selected under the effect range is a rectangle. So we have a rectangle shape with a width of 64 and a height of 64. And if we go over here to range direction, we'll see that the default value is a set angle and it's wanting to face the upward direction. So this range will be facing the upward direction of this object. And if we move on to the next parameter, effect settings, remember this is where the other objects are entering the range, what happens to them. We'll see that the default setting under the effect direction is going to be a set angle and it's going to be facing up. So this effect direction is saying what direction do you want it to be pushed towards or pulled towards. And in this case, the default is up. So it wants to push it up. The only other setting in here is the effect strength. That's set by default, and it is set at 100 by default. I'm going to change it to 20 just so that it's less drastic. So the default setting will push it up and the effective strength will be 20 pixels up. And now if we move down to this parameter, set target, the default setting is to set by an object group, and that group is the player group. So I'm going to hit OK and go to playtest. And now we get to playtest the default settings. Now it's going to be a little tricky because you can't visually see the range that you've set up. So it takes a little trial and error, but as you understand how the ranges work and the directions and angles, it becomes easier. But for this, we're just going to have some trial and error so that I can make this make sense. As I approach the object, you'll notice that just out of the blue, when I got in its range, I just shot up. And I shot up more than 20 pixels. And then if I try to go back down and I hit the range again, then I only get shot up once 20 pixels. And it looks more normal. But when I came from down here, I just get shot up a bunch. And that is because as long as this push-pull object is in the runtime action, it's going to be taking effect. It's almost like you're saying, okay, this object now pushes and pulls. And then if it was to leave this state and go to this one without the push and pull, it would stop pushing and pulling. So just make a note that this push and pull will last the whole time it is ran in that state. And if you want it to run in the next state as well, you have to also put it in the next state. But it's a one time per state use. And that's kind of interesting, but it's definitely good to understand that. So now let's go to the next thing, the range size. We see that it started, let's see, it doesn't even go down in this area. And if you remember, when we set up our runtime action, we set up the range direction to be facing up. So the range direction is actually what is saying, where are we placing that rectangle? So now if we go back to the actual game, you'll see that we can touch the sides and it shoots you up. and about right here, it shoots you up as well. So you can see that it is setting it based on the up direction of this object in about a square kind of like that, a 64 by 64. And then you can see that it pushes up from there and so on. So this is the default setting, and that makes a lot more sense about how the shape works, the direction, and how the runtime actually plays out through the state. So now let's close this and go back into push and pull. And now we can dive into all the options and go through all these different examples. So if we start at the top with the effective range and range direction, basically where we make the range, I'm going to select this first option here, which says set the effective range base as a connection point. So we can pull down the menu, and I have already created a push-pull point that I want it to go to. And if I was to select that and click OK and go to playtest, you'll see that where I went before, it's not pushing me up. So let's try to find where I set that connection point. And I set that connection point over here. So I just set it to the left of the object a little bit. And we can see in animations that that was true. I set that up just a little bit to the left of the object. So now if we were to go back into push-pull, I'm going to deselect the connection point. We're just going to be using it as the object from now on. And now we'll go to the effective range, and we've tried the rectangle. We understand how the rectangle works. Let's do the circle now. So I'm going to click on circle, and the first thing you're going to get is the radius. So the half of the circle is the radius, so I'm going to lower this just to make a smaller circle. I'm going to do 30 distant radius, and then the emission angle. This is how far around the object is it going to go, and by default it's 360, and it says right here that 360 is for all directions, so this will make a full circle around the object. And so if we just leave it at 360 and hit OK and go to playtest, we will be able to see now what a circle does, and a 360 circle at that. So if we approach it from here, we get pushed up. If we approach it down, we get pushed up. If we approach it left, if we approach it from one of the diagonals, we got it there. And then if we approach it from down, we also get pushed up there. And you'll notice that as I'm moving really slow, and it's kind of jittery. And that's because it's constantly trying to push me up, but it's not pushing me through the object. So do note that you don't get pushed through objects like that. See, I'm stuck on this object and I'm moving really slow because it's trying to push me until I move out and it can finally push me all the way up. So with that, I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to go back to push pull. And now instead of a 360 emission angle, we're going to try something like a 90-degree emission angle and see how this works. So if I was to click OK and play test on this, now we have to try to find this emission angle. So I found it right there, and then I'm finding it right here, and then I find it as I go diagonal right there. As I approach it from this way, I have to get up quite a ways to hit it. Doesn't hit at all right there, and then I have to get right there. So you can see that the 90-degree is about right here in this area. Now, why did it go facing this way? Well, the answer is back in the push and pull, because the set angle direction is set to going up. So that's why it set that 90-degree facing up. So if we were to change this angle to say 270 to face left now, and we were to hit OK and hit playtest, we will see that now as we move, we can't find it where we were finding it before. It's not down here. It is now to the left. So now it's facing the left of it, but it's still at a 90-degree angle. Now, why am I still getting pushed up? It's kind of weird why I'm not getting pushed the way that you would think, me trying to go into that angle, and that's because the angle is still set to up. So we'll get into this here in a minute. Just want to point that out real quick. So real quick, let's go back to rectangle and just show another way that this applies. Now that we've set the angle to a different direction, I want to adjust the width. I want to make it 80 wide. and I want to make it really small as far as the height goes. So I want to make it 10 high. So if we click OK, go to playtest, we can now try to find this rectangle that we have made. We know that it's going to be on the left facing because we set the 270. So we can see that it's right here on the left facing. It's not as high because we set the height smaller. And now we can just kind of go around here and see how long 80 width is. So it's about right there. And then we can go and see when I will react to it there, which is about right. So now we can see that our rectangle is about this size and it is facing the left. So that's just how we can use this. If we go back into here, how we can use this set angle to specify which direction these ranges are going to be pointing at. So the last option to try in here is that we can actually just say we want this direction to be based off the object's display direction. And before we play test, I'm going to hit circle so that we can get that 90-degree angle. And I'm going to hit OK and hit play test. And we are going to now see that it doesn't really affect us on this, it doesn't affect us behind, it doesn't affect us facing this way. And that angle is now going to be set the way that the object is facing, which the object happens to be facing down. So we can see that our 90-degree angle is going to be based around this area right here. So that is the way the angles work in the push-pull. And we can now move on. Before we move on, I'm going to set the angle again. I'm going to face it up just for testing purposes. And we can now move on to the effects settings and go from here. So the angle that we have been getting pushed has been up. So let's try a simple getting pushed right and see how that looks. If I hit OK and push playtest, we will see that as I'm hitting that area, the range, I'm getting pushed to the right now. And I get pushed to the right no matter what direction I approach it at. So now some other options we have are we can use this object's display direction. So the object that is pushing, we can use its display direction. If we were to hit OK and hit playtest on that, we would see that the object's facing down. So as I hit this, I should be getting pushed down, and that is exactly what happens. And now we'll move on to the next option, which is this object's connection point. Now, this option is very useful, especially in top-down games, because this one will go based off the angle that you're approaching the connection point. So you don't have to specify all these different angles depending on what way you're facing. It automatically pushes you the direction that you are approaching the connection point from. So if we click this pull-down menu and select the connection point, I'm also going to change this to 360 so that we can see the full circle. And then I'm going to click OK. I'm also going to show you in the animations that I now have the connection point in the center of the object. And so going back here and now clicking playtest. So now if we approach the bot from the right side, you'll notice that I get pushed back to the right. And you'll also notice if I keep doing it, I get pushed down a little bit down as well because I wasn't perfectly level with its x-axis. So it's slightly pushing me downward too. You can see that. So now if I approach it from the bottom, you see that I get pushed back down. And I'm also, since I'm not level with its y perfectly, it's pushing me also in the angle that I'm more facing. And the same if I approach it from the left. And then also the same if I approach it from up. So you can see that this is a method to get the direction that you should be getting pushed back from, and it does it automatically with the connection point. So I think that this is going to be one of the most useful options here. So that's pushing. Now let's view it as pulling. All we have to do is set the effective strength to -20 now, and if we hit OK and hit playtest, we'll see that now when I try to enter from the bot's right side, I'll get pulled in. Now, it's going to be a little hard to get out of here. I'll have to reset because I don't have a state that stops from pulling. But you'll see that this is how you can set up a pull with your connection point. And now we can go to the next setting. Before we do though, I'm going to set it back to the set angle for the direction, and I'm going to set this back to up to face. And now we can go to effect strength, and this is a plus or minus, and we'll get to this here. It was set originally to 100 and I brought it down to 20. You can imagine if it was 100 it would push me a long way back. And one thing that's very interesting is you can actually set a negative number for this. Now, what negative 20 is going to do is we said we want it to go up. Well, if it's going negative 20, then it's actually going down. So we can make it move the opposite direction of the set angle based on if we do a positive number or a negative number. So if we were to click OK and click playtest here, we would see that we're supposed to get pushed up depending on the angle, but we actually get pushed down because we are at a negative 20 effective strength. So now I'm going to change this back to 20, but now we understand that you can use negative numbers as well. The next option here is a bigger or smaller effect based on distance from the object. So this is very interesting. You can actually increase or decrease the strength depending on if it's nearer or farther than the object. So let's just say nearer. Let's say at nearer we want it to go, we want to amplify the strength by 500%. And when we're farther out, we actually want to reduce the strength by, we only want to make it 25% of what the strength is there. So let's test this out. Let's hit OK and hit play test. And now we can test exactly how being nearer or farther away affects the strength of the push. So remember, it normally gets pushed about 20 pixels, which is about right up here. And this object is facing up and 90-degree angle. So as I'm near the object and touch the range, you'll see that it pushed me up quite a bit. It pushed me up 5 times the normal amount. And then you'll notice that as I try to go back down, that I only get pushed up a little bit. And that's because I set the far away push to be 25% of the normal strength. So here we are trying to go constantly right here, but then I touch it once being near and it shoots me really far. So now we can exit this and go back into push-pull. So now we'll move on. I'm going to click off of this bigger, smaller effect so that we maintain the true 20 pixel push. And now we're going to go to this option, apply only once to target. And this one's really simple. We're going to click OK and click playtest. And we will see that as I hit the push, I get pushed once, and that's it. So that's what that option does. It only applies the push or the pull once. Moving along, I'm going to click off this option. We're going to move down to set target object parameters now. The default one we've been using is the set by object group. And if you pull down the drop down, you can see that we could select from all objects the 2 default groups that come with the project, or groups that you have created in the project. And basically all these are doing is that if you have a group selected, any object that is in that group is going to be pushable or pullable. So since we've been seeing that this whole time, we're going to move on to the next option here, and this one's called set by object. So if we click down on here, and I'm just going to select the chair object. And we have a couple other options right here. We can select all, which would mean every chair object that I have on the scene, or we could select single, and that would mean the first instance of this chair, that is the only one that will be pushable. So for our case, we can just put single or all, it doesn't matter. And now if I clicked OK and I click playtest, I have this chair as pushable. So first I'm going to try to go in it as this professor guy, and it's not pushing me at all. But if I go grab the chair and I push the chair into range, you'll see that now I can get it to get pushed. because that's what it does. Now remember, my wall detection will block it from moving. So that's why it's not getting pushed down there. Second I move, it gets pushed. So we can see that we can specify an object. And if we go back in here, so now we'll go to the next option here called objects touching this object. And basically what it's saying is that the target object can only get pushed if it's now touching this object. And that could be really handy for a push event that only happens when you touch another object. And since this sub option here, exclude object groups, since the player group's on this, I'm going to click off of it just so that I can show you that now the push will only happen when you're touching this object. So if I hit OK and then hit playtest, we will see that now I have to be touching this object. So before I touch, I'm just going to go around it. Notice that I'm not getting pushed even though I should right now. And I'm just going to go around it and nothing happens. And now when I touch the object, I get pushed up. And now I get pushed up again, get pushed up again, and up again, and up. Now if I'm touching it from the below position, I'm not going to move anywhere because I can't go through it. So just note that. And then also, I can push this chair into the object and it will get pushed up. There it goes. So now let's exclude the player group just so that we can see that you can exclude groups. And we'll hit OK and hit playtest. And now I'll go up to the object and notice that it's not pushing me at all and nothing's happening. Even the angle that we set doesn't even take effect because we are only doing it by objects that can touch this one, and we have excluded the player group. And the last thing to go over is objects locked by this object. So the target would have to be locked in order for this push pull to take effect. And if we click OK and we don't lock a target and we play test, and I'm sure you can guess what will happen if you do not lock something first. Nothing happens, no pushback. So what we got to do first is we have to add the lock object. And I'm just going to leave it on the object group and I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to grab the locked object and I'm going to move it up. And now I'm going to play test. And now we can see that the object is going to be pushed back because it's locked. And so will the chair because it is also in the player group and it is locked as well. So now I'm going to exit this. Quick edit here to show an interesting interaction between lock object and push pull. Most runtimes need the lock object ahead of it so that it registers the lock and then the runtime will perform the action on the lock. Well, with push pull object, you can actually have the lock object behind that runtime because since push pull makes it to where this entire state will be a push and pulling object, then you can actually lock behind it and it will still take effect. So just to show that this works, I have lock object behind the push pull, and when I go to playtest, you will see that the professor still gets pushed. So that's it for this edit. I'm going to get rid of locked object, and now is the time when we go over the changeable even after placement on scene button here. So with this highlighted, we can now go to the scenes tab, and by having changeable even after placement on scene, we can now select the push-pull bot and we get access to this runtime that's in this state, and we can select the options and change them according to the individual object on the scene. So if I was to copy and paste this, I could move this one up here, let's say, and I can change his direction of the circle angle to be facing right now, so it would be facing this way. And then I can also set the pushback to be right. So if I try to bump in there, I'm going to get pushed back right. And I'm going to set this to be any player group on there. I'm going to come back to this push-pull bot. I'm going to leave it the same as far as the angle and the push goes, but I'm going to set by object, and I want it to be a chair object. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to place this chair here, and I'm going to copy and paste it and move it over here. Click back on the push-pull bot, and I'm going to select the chair 1. So I only want it to push back the chair 1, and this is something only changeable on scene will let you do. If you remember, the runtime actions only lets you do all or single, which by single, what I was meaning is that the first one on this list is the one that single would do. So this chair right here is the one that single would do. Or you can actually specify the object. So if I was to say chair 1 and click play, and as we're playing testing this, I'm going to come up and test this top one first, make sure that it's pushing us to the right and the angle is facing the right. That works. Now we're going to see which chair is chair 1, and we're going to try to push this one in first, and that does not get pushed around, so that's definitely not chair 1. And that one, as soon as it touches the angle, gets pushed up. So this is really nice that we have this structure where we can specify certain things within the same object. And with that said, if there is anything I missed or any cool way that you have used this runtime, please drop the comment below. Your ideas are the best ideas, and so we would like to see what you have done. And with that, I will see you at the next video.